All right, I invite you to turn in your Bibles to Psalm chapter 127. Psalm 127. Go ahead and grab a Bible under your seat or under the seat in front of you, and you could turn to Psalm 127. Hey, if you're a member of the worship team, whether you're on this week or any other weeks, will you stand for us, please? If you're taking part in our music ministry here. Can we give a hand? Thank God for their services. All right, thank you so much. You may have a seat. Now, they spend a lot of time getting together during the week and tweaking things, and in the sound room in the back, those guys trying to work on some different things. And so I just want to thank you all for your ministry this morning. As we get into this week 2 of our parenting series, I want to remind us of what we went through last week, which was in Psalm 127. And so what we're going to do, by way of reminders, we're going to read a couple verses. We're going to read verse 1 and verse 3. So I invite you to stand with me as we read God's Word this morning. Psalm 127. I'll read verse 1 and then 3. So, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. And jumping down to verse 3. Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from Him. And verse 4, like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. You may have a seat. Last week, in week 1 of the parenting series, we set it up with the firm foundation of who God is, right? We understand that as parents, we can't do this alone. In fact, and what we understand is that if God has gifted these children to us, then don't we think that He's going to help us raise them in the way that He wants them to be raised? And so last week we talked about the idea of trusting God with His gifts. Trusting God with His children. You know, in preparation for this series, as I'm reading through, I got to tell you, it's like Alice in Wonderland, down the rabbit hole in the Bible looking at verses on parenting. I mean, you read one verse and then you start breaking out, the Hebrew and the Greek, and then it takes you to another verse and you're like, that's not about parenting, but that word is used there, and it's really crazy how God ties all this stuff together and lets me understand what it means to be a parent and how inadequate I feel. In this book, one of the things that I used to study for this it's called Full Circle Parenting, a guide for crucial conversations by a guy named Jimmy and his wife Kristen Scroggins. Full Circle Parenting. If you're a parent in this room or you have any influence over people younger than you, this is an amazing book to help wrap your mind and your head around how we can do better as parents. And so it's called Full Circle Parenting. But in the book, the guy Jimmy, he says this in the beginning. He says, parenting isn't for wimps. Yeah, it's not. It's not. And by the laughs out there, I think that you can agree. He was telling the story how he had his little toddler. How this is how difficult it is with kids. This is how difficult it is to parent kids. Is you're always on that line between correction and encouragement, right? And so he's got this little boy, this toddler, and as he's wandering around the house trying to get into things, trying to do things, trying to learn, he came up to his daddy one day as he was sitting and studying, and he said, Daddy, and he says, son, what is it, Johnny? He says, well, I cleaned the bathroom for you. Okay. We're thinking, oh man, what did he get into now? And he said, well, what did you do in the bathroom? He said, I cleaned the toilet, Daddy. Okay. And so Daddy takes a break and takes a breath. All right. And he says, what did you use to clean the toilet? I used your toothbrush, Daddy. Wow. And how long have you been doing that? Every day, Daddy. Parenting isn't for wimps. Because this is the kind of thing, like the kid is excited because he's doing something that he thinks is helpful, something that he thinks is like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be helping around the house. Yet, on the one hand, he's doing the right thing in the wrong way. And so dad is in that moment of encouraging and thanking him without breaking his spirit by telling him he did it wrong. Parenting isn't for wimps. I don't remember if it was last week or the week before or something. I kind of told you a little bit about how I am and the way that I do things. I am constantly on that line, trying to encourage, but at the same time trying to correct, because I just want them to know what's right. My kids know this; they understand this, and so it is hard. But the reason that parenting isn't for wimps is because sometimes, actually, that's a wrong phrase. Parenting isn't for wimps because all the time we have to make the hard call. All the time, as parents, our job is to make the hard call. Our job is to look at our kids, to look at the world around us, and to look at God and say, how do these things meet up? Where do they clash? And what's my part in helping bringing this kid through this world to God, right? Now, we talked last week about the goal of parenting, and 3 John verse 4 was our verse. But I want you to look at something. I got a quote. It's a long quote, but I want you to bear with me on this. It didn't even show up. Okay, great. All right, so I want you to. This is a quote from a lady named Sally Clarkson in her book called The Mission of Motherhood. And she says this: I don't just want my kids to be moral. I don't just want them to know all the biblical rules for behavior. I don't just want them to go through my home with good grades, no drug addiction, and no premarital sex. And this is the key. I've got it underlined. She said, I want them to leave my home with a hunger and passion to know God personally and to be used by Him to accomplish great things for His kingdom. Parenting isn't for wimps. Parenting is about developing in your child a hunger and passion to know God personally. And if we're not careful, we won't point them to God at all, or we'll point them away from God because we don't understand about developing a hunger and a passion for a personal knowledge of God in our children. We try to fix their behavior without reaching their heart. 3 John 4 says, I have no greater joy than to hear that what? My children are walking in the truth. That's our goal as parents. And our goal in this walking in truth is the idea of heart transformation, not just behavior modification. You agree with me? We want to change our children's hearts and direct their hearts to God. And that's not easy. Parenting isn't for wimps because we have to make the hard call. There's no such thing as a good cop, bad cop, mom and dad in a relationship. Like sometimes you both have to be the bad cop, right? We both have to say the hard things. We have to do the hard things. And guess what? Parenting is about being the parent. It's not about being a friend. Parenting, you start out in training and teaching your child the rules. You teach them what it means to live. You teach them how to survive in the world. You teach them about a relationship with God. You be their parent. And as they continue to grow up and as they mature, they eventually develop into a state where you as a parent can become their friend. But it doesn't happen in adolescence. It doesn't happen when they're kids. It doesn't happen when they're still trying to figure things out. Our goal as parents is not to make our kids happy. How dare you, Pastor Andrew? Well, our goal is to see our kids walking in the truth. You know, teaching driver's ed for a long time showed me some things. That if I don't guide and direct the students in the car, they're going to do what feels good in the moment, what makes them happy in the moment, and it's the wrong decision. They're going to merge onto the interstate when it's not clear because they want to be happy about getting on the road. And I have to say, no, slow down, there's a car coming. Or I have to say, you have to speed up in this moment. Are you following me? There are different things in this life that we have to do when we look at our kids and they say, well, I want to do this, I want to be this. And you're going, yeah, but I've got like 30 years on you, son. I got 30 years on you, daughter. I got 20 years on you. I'm your parent. I birthed you. I've seen what happens when you take this road. Parenting isn't for wimps because sometimes we have to look like the bad guy to help our kids walk in the truth. So as we get into this message today, that's what we're looking at. We're going to concentrate on one verse. And it aligns with this quote in the book by Jimmy Scroggins. He says, we can train our kids to behave and still miss the heart issues. Biblical parenting means going after the heart. The Bible tells us that from birth our hearts are deceitful. And so as parents who are in the know, parents who are in the knowledge, walking in the knowledge of the truth of who God is, we have to look at that deceitful heart and we have to do our best to go after that heart and to point them to Christ. And the question is, how do we do it? What does that look like? Well, last week made the point that I teach what I know, but I can only reproduce what I am. And I talked to Dean this week, and he told me, you don't have to quote me on that because I got that from somebody else. So next time you see it, not today, but another time, I'm not going to have his name on there anymore because it's just what it is. I teach what I know, but I can only reproduce what I am. And so when it comes to this idea of walking in truth, I can only reproduce. If it comes to the idea of trying to grab the kid's heart, you can only reproduce what you are. You can only grab their heart if you are what you say you want them to be. Understand? And it's not easy. Parenting isn't for wimps, is it? No, not at all. So, last week we learned from Psalm 127. Let me get my bow and arrow out just so we remember. You know, I felt a little bad about being so hard on Jonathan last week for the Nerf bow. But then he made a meme on Facebook. I don't feel so bad anymore. But that's Jonathan. We go way back. You know, we talked about the idea that children are a blessing from God. They're a gift from God, and a quiver that's full is a blessing to a man, right? Now, one of the things about this idea of a bow and arrow is you've got to have a target. And the target is walking in truth. And you've got to aim it. I'm not going to pull this back because I don't know if it's going to ricochet. But you've got to aim it at the direction that you're going. And as you have your kids, wherever you aim them, they're likely to go. You understand? As I pull this arrow, the string back, and I let it go, it's going to go wherever I'm pointing it. Okay? And so we need to be careful as parents where we're pointing the arrow. And the further back you pull the bow, the further back you pull the string, the further that child will go. The further you stretch them, the further they will go. Those are some of the things that we looked at last week, and we looked at Solomon's words in Psalm 127, and we opened with that this morning. But as we walked away with the truth that when it comes to our family, we can't accomplish this hard work of seeing our kids walk in the truth unless we live a certain way, right? Unless what we're teaching is embodied in who we are. And so maybe the question that we ask ourselves now is, okay, if I'm supposed to be a certain way, and my kids need to walk in the truth, what is the best way to do that? How do we raise our children in the best way? Well, I'll tell you this, it can't be done without God's hand all over the process. Our firm foundation in Jesus Christ. I invite you to turn your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 22. We're going to go through, I'm going to break down a very, very familiar verse to many Christian parents. Proverbs chapter 22. As we ask the question, do we want to raise our children in the best way? And if so, how do I do it? Well, one thing we need to understand about Proverbs. Is a proverb a promise? Is it a tried and true A plus B equals C formula? No, but it's a general thing. Generally, as you read through all the wisdom in Proverbs, as King Solomon is writing this stuff out at the end of his life, after he was given all the wisdom in the world, and then he lived a life that didn't reflect living in that wisdom, and finally he's got kids of his own, and now he's writing in Proverbs, and he's like, kids, look, sons, daughters, I need you to listen to what I didn't listen to myself. And so he writes it down. He writes down in Proverbs what needs to happen. And so he writes down in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, and this is what it says. If you've got the NIV here, it says, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. Raise your hand if you've ever heard that verse before, or a version of that verse. Okay, so this verse, as you break it down in the Hebrew, it was originally written in Hebrew, it is confusing. Because it's not spelled out exactly like it says there. Do you know how I know that? Because the New International Version says, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they're old, they will not turn from it. The New Living Translation says, direct your children onto the right path, and when they are older, they will not leave it. The New American Standard Bible says, train up a child. This is a little more familiar probably to us. Train up a child on the way he should go. Even when he grows older, he will not abandon it. And then, of course, the way I learned it, King James. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And we're going to break this verse down. And so bear with me today. We're going to get a little deep. We're going to go down one of those rabbit holes so that we can understand the totality of this verse. And I will tell you, I've got an illustration that last night on the way back from basketball, took Noah to basketball practice and we played a little bit. It dawned on me. I was like praying, God, give me some clarity on this verse and give me an illustration that will make sense for how this verse breaks out and how it can be applied in our lives. And God gave it to me in that moment, and I was pretty excited about it. So Proverbs 22:6 is what we're going to look at today. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. If the goal of parenting is for my joy to see my children walking in the truth, to have a knowledge of who God is, to have a personal relationship with God, to have a passionate life in relation to who God and Jesus Christ is, I need to know how to do it. And it's not easy, as we can see in this verse. Upon first reading, it looks pretty easy. Well, you just train them how they should go, and when they grow up, they'll come back to you. Even if they go astray, they'll come back. I want to go through something here and help you understand that's not exactly what the verse means, the way that we may have always believed it. And so this first word, this first verb underlined, train up. What should I do? Well, I should train up my child, right? Well, what does that word train up actually mean? Multiple definitions for this word. Many definitions. Throughout the Bible, this very word is used and is translated in multiple different ways in English. One way is dedicate. So you could say, dedicate a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Dedicate. It's the same word that's used for consecrating a temple or following, a house. Like you get ready to build a house, and it's like, okay, now we're going to dedicate this home to God. Dedicate a child. But there's another word for it. This word, train up, was used for a verb that means to make someone experienced. Make someone experienced. Make a child experience in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from. So what does that experience word mean? Does it mean you tell them something? You tell them one time and you walk away and expect them to know it? No, you're training them. They're experiencing this as they're learning it. They're doing something. You're coming alongside someone Like an apprentice, your child is your apprentice. They're coming alongside you, watching what you're doing. You're showing them, I teach what I know, but I can only reproduce what I am. You're I aming here in this moment, right? All right, so train up means to dedicate, but it also means to make someone or something experience. But there's another word that it means. It means submissive. And it was used when speaking of a horse. Speaking of a horse, leading a horse by a rope in its mouth. Now, you've seen some dads who lead their kids. They act like they got bits on them and bridles, and they're trying to get them all around and tell them where to go. It carries a stronger connotation with it, doesn't it? But it's about teaching them to submit. If you don't teach a child submission, then what's going to happen when they're 35 years old and a boss tells them to do something? If you don't teach a child to submit to you, even if they don't understand why you're telling them what to do or what not to do, then when they get older, they're going to question authority. And if they don't agree with that authority, their boss, if they don't agree with that situation, the law, cop pulls them over, whatever. If they don't agree with these things, there are going to be problems. They're not going to submit, will they? And so we've got to teach our kids submission. Now, it's not about holding them down with your foot on their neck. That's not what it is. But when we're talking about train up a child, it says, teach a child submission in the way that he should go. As a master leads their horse to where it needs to go to stay safe. But this next verb, this other root for this word is awesome. I have to tell you, it's amazing. This is the encouraging part of this whole verse. It's one of the most encouraging things for me. This idea of train up, it actually comes from the word for palate. Okay, we know not wood pallets, but the palate in your mouth. And this is what it means. It means to rub the palate of a child with chewed dates. What are you talking about? Okay, remember, King Solomon was Jewish. Okay, and so they have a little bit different culture. But it's a picture of a midwife who would rub the palate of a newborn with dates. So as a child is born, the midwife would go and she would stick her fingers in a bowl full of dates and squish it around and get the sour taste of the dates on her fingers, and she would stick her fingers in the child's mouth. And so what that did, it was a tart, a sour sensation that would cause the child to start going. The child would start to suck. And then the midwife would hand the child to the mother. And the child would begin to nurse. Now, for many of you moms in here, you may know how difficult it was for some of your kids to nurse at first hand. Especially brand new moms. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what I'm doing. It was hard, wasn't it? It was difficult to get some of your kids are eaters and some of them weren't. It's like, come on, what are you doing? So these midwives stick their fingers in dates, get the juice, and they stick it in the palate. And this is the same message that's being sent here. Just like a midwife does what she can to get her child, to get that child to be ready to suck, to eat, to nourish itself through mom's excellence, whatever. Didn't come out the way that I meant it. Jess, was you the first one to chuckle on that? I don't know. Just stop. See what happens when I get off my note. All right, let me just read a quote from Charles Swindoll. Chuck Swindoll, he wrote this in relation to this whole idea. So you've got this verb, train up, means to dedicate, means to consecrate, to set it aside, to direct with a purpose. It also means to teach the child submission and to help it be experienced and understand where it needs to go. But on the same side, it's teach the child how to be ready to take the nourishment of the parents. And Chuck Swindoll says this: the parent is to bring the child into submission and create a thirst for the nourishing flow of the parent's wisdom and counsel. I'm going to read it again. The parent is to bring the child into submission and create a thirst for the nourishing flow of the parent's wisdom and counsel. Isn't that cool? Train up. That's what it means. It means set them aside for something. Dedicate them. Teach them what it means to obey rules and authority. Help them get to a place where they're coming to you for the wisdom and counsel that you have to offer. It's awesome. God says so much in so little, right? This verse was supposed to be tacked on at the end of last week's message. And I couldn't do it. I was like, God, I got to give you a week on this one. Because it's just so awesome. So, the imperative, the idea is that we're training, we're doing all of this with a purpose. And God says the goal is to see that your children, our children, walk in the truth of who God is. Okay, so if that's what that train up part means, well, let's jump to the next part. When? If that's the what should I do, I need to dedicate my child. When should I do this? Well, let's see, wrong one. I didn't have it in there. But a child. When they're a child. And what does the word in Hebrew mean for child? Okay, so get this. It actually means a child. Okay? Na'ar. It means a child, but it's from an infant to 3 or 4 or 5 years old. But also, as you read Scripture, the same word child is used in other places to refer to anyone from infant age all the way up to marriageable age. So you're training, you're dedicating, you're teaching your child submission, you're teaching them how to experience things the right way. You're teaching them how to come to you and how to be nourished the right way. And it's all happening from infant to the point that they're out of your house, to the point that they're mature and ready to be married. You don't stop. So when should I do this? As long as I'm around my kid. Can you train a child if you're not there? Okay, so during the whole COVID time, many kids were working from home, right? And the teachers were online teaching, and it's great. Like, it was amazing that they were able to do this kind of thing, where a teacher would present a lesson, and then the kid would learn on their own. But one thing that Katie and I noticed, even with our kids, is they were homeschooled, so they were used to the idea of distance learning. One thing that we learned and we noticed is that teacher has no idea what's going on with our kid. None. They were training them from a distance, but they weren't training them with their presence. They weren't there. And so they didn't know if Ileana and Noah were understanding the concepts. They didn't know if they were following and doing their assignments the way they're supposed to be doing. The ones who knew were mommy and daddy. And so it's important to understand that in this process, we have to be there. The overall context of this verse is your presence. You cannot be a parent from a distance. You've got to be present in the life of your children. And so here, we've got to train them up when they're children. How difficult is it? Wait a minute. Okay, Noah, come up here once. Let me use an illustration. Okay. If I wanted to teach Noah basketball, do I say, hey, Noah, go out in the parking lot and start dribbling and shooting? Let's just say he's 10 years younger than this. Hold the ball. Let's say he's 10 years younger than he is right now. Let's say he's 4 years old. And I'm like, hey, Noah, go out and practice and dribble and shoot. How well do you think he's going to do? He's not going to do very well. And so what do I need to do? I need to show him. Well, can I show him from I'm standing at the glass door looking out the window? Hey, go ahead and dribble. Is that showing him? Am I showing him how to do things? No. I've actually got to get up and I've got to come and I would say, okay, Noah, you got to get in your triple threat position. All right? Then you dribble the ball. Okay, now, get triple threat and dribble. Look down. Look down. Now, do you think he's ready for the court? You see, he's not ready for the court because yes, I did come alongside him and I showed him something, but I need to show and explain. There's something that he's doing here that if I let him continue to do this, it's going to be a problem. Does anybody know? Okay, just hold the ball for a second, but stay how you are. What's he doing right there that's a problem? He's looking down. You see? He's dribbling like this. And now if I don't intervene, if I just stay there, okay, I showed you, and then I walk back. If I don't intervene and I let him continue to do what he's doing, as he grows up and he gets older and older and older, he's going to stay in the habit of dribbling with his head down. All right, Paul. He'll be one of these kids then, you can go sit down, thank you. He'll be one of these kids then that dribbles into traffic, not cars, but people who are covering him, and his own teammates. And he's going to run his head right into him, and he can't see the goal. He can't see his team. He can't even really see where he's going. It's one of the hardest things when you're teaching children how to do something, and I've really noticed it with basketball. It's very, very easy. They come in with their bad habits, right? The hardest ones to teach are not the ones who've never touched a ball. It's the ones who are, I've been playing basketball for 5 years. You know what I'm talking about. You know, they are the hardest ones to teach because what do you have to do in teaching them the proper technique? You have to break all the habits, the bad habits. And it is so hard to break a habit. It's hard to break a habit of a kid who shoots like this. Okay? It's hard to break a habit of a kid who dribbles with their head down. It's hard to break a habit of a kid who's constantly playing with his back to the basket and doing behind-the-back passes and stuff without looking. It's really, really hard. It's actually easier to train a kid to be good at basketball if you get them before they don't know anything. Because in doing that, you're shoving your fingers into some dates, and you're sticking it in their mouth, and they're going, okay, I'm ready to listen. You got it? I'm ready to listen. I'm ready to take what are you telling me, coach? And as your parent, it's even stronger. You're more than a coach. You're a presence. And so you've got to train up a child while they're young. Because you've got a lot better chance to keep them from cleaning your toilet with a toothbrush. A 35-year-old who's cleaning your toilet with your toothbrush is a problem. Because not only do you have to try to retrain them, untrain them, you have to deal with their attitude. The obstinance. So, you train them when they're a child. When he's old, this word for old, it's not just a picture of somebody with, gray hair. The word old actually comes from the word for beard. Okay? Well, what does that have to do with it? When do men start to grow whiskers? When they're teenagers, when they're young. Mustache, beard, from their chin. And so it's a picture of when he is reaching maturity, he won't depart from the training that you've put into his life. When do you train them? Before they reach maturity. You got to teach them. And you got to be a parent. And it's hard. You've got to make the call for them even if they hate you for it. No, son, you can't dribble the ball out of bounds. I don't care how much you like to. It's not the right way to go. No, son, you can't shoot on the other team's basket. I don't care how good you think you are at scoring that bucket. You're doing it for the wrong team. It's not about making your kids happy. It's about being a parent and seeing what they need, understanding what you must do to put them on track to walk in the truth. So, what should I do? I should train up my child when? When they're a child, before they reach maturity. How do I do this? Well, how do I train them? In the way. Now, just so you know, it says, in the way he should go. That he should go is not in the Hebrew. The word should is not in there. But let's break this down 2 little phrases at a time. That word in means according to. So train up a child according to, and the way is actually, in the Hebrew, his way. Train up a child, dedicate a child according to his way. How should I do this? I should train in, according to, in keeping with. It's literally according to his way. Chuck Swindoll says this: if you want your training to be meaningful and wise, be observant and discover your child's way and adapt your training accordingly. What are we talking about? According to your child. God says that we've got to dedicate, we've got to train, we've got to teach our kids submission, we've got to teach them experiencing life. We have to bring them to a place of nourishment, understand they need to come to us for wisdom and counsel, but we've got to do it in their way. I've got 4 kids, and all 4 of them are different. They each have their own way. They all have a different way about them, and it's awesome. You see, what worked for Noah doesn't work for Ileana, and what worked for Noah and Ileana doesn't work for Catalea and Dariella. Parents, you get this, right? It's like your kids are different, and so God says you've got to look at the way that they're designed. You've got to look at the way that they are. You've got to understand how to train them according to the way that they are. I've got a military background, and I have to be careful that I'm not training them according to my background, according to my military way. I got to be careful that I'm not training my kids to my expectations. I can't compare. Now, I struggle with this sometimes. I used to do this when I was your age. Why aren't you doing it? Well, they're different than me. Now, we're not talking about laziness or anything like that. I'm just talking about expectations on your kids. So we as a parent, if we're not present, if we're not coming alongside them, if we don't know them, then how can we know their way? How can we know the best way to train their kids? Katie's the K-4 teacher at school. Every single one of those kids is different, and she has to reach out to them in different ways to help them learn and understand. Boys are different than girls, right? Have to teach them in a different way. Have to train them in a different way. That's what God's saying. How should I do this? Well, I need to train them according to something, and then according to their way. This word, the way, it's a characteristic. Metaphorically, it means that they're according to their characteristics. Noah Reed is different than Piper, right? No, you're different than your sister, aren't you? So mom and dad have to handle you in a different way. So train up a child in keeping with his characteristics. Well, this word, the way, it actually means bent. Because the word way comes from the word tread. And when we're talking about tread, it's talking about tread or trampling, and it talks about the bent of a bow. When you step on it to bring it down to string the bow. So in the Bible, it actually uses this same word in a different form, but it's the same root word when it talks about God pulling back his bow. Bent. It's bent. And what that tells us is that God created them with a bent, a certain way. He created them with certain characteristics that we need to be aware of as parents. But see, there is a bent, and it's established by God in every child that he gives us. Every child is an individual. For every outgoing child, you may have an introvert. For every intelligent child, you might have an average child. Doesn't mean you're a bad parent. For every creative child, you may have a practical child. You can't parent the creative child in the same way that you parent the practical child. They're going to see things differently, so you've got to get in there and you've got to figure out, how do I train them? How do I teach them? How do I get them to a place where they fall passionately in love with Jesus and God and build this relationship personally? I've got to know them. At the same time, I have to be living passionately in relationship with Jesus. That's why mom and dads are so important. You're both coming along at different angles. My kids see something different in me than they see in Katie. We have different characteristics about ourselves. And so the idea of this word bent, we're bent in different ways. We have an opportunity to be bent in our creation. We have an opportunity to be bent toward God. What am I talking about? Genesis 1, 26 and 27 says, Then God said, after he's created the world, he's created the animals, he's created everything, he says, let us, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. God created man with a bent. He created him in a certain way. He created us in a way that was like, look, his perfect design was to be created and leaning and bending in God's direction. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. So we have this bent of this opportunity to be bent toward God, characteristically, but there's also a problem, and it's called sin. You see, Romans 5:12 says, Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, Adam, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. There's a bent now. God said, it is so good. They're created in my image. But then sin entered the world. And in Psalm 51:5, David writes, Surely I was sinful at birth. Sinful from the time my mother conceived me. I was created now with a bent towards sin. So, let's look at this verse again. Train up a child in the way he should go. Train up a child in the way he is bent, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. Noah, come back up here, please. Noah wants to dribble a ball with his head down. Dribble. That's the bent that Noah has in his life. That's the way it is as he's trying to develop and become an experienced basketball. He wants to dribble with his head down. And if I, as a father, don't step in and say, hey, Noah, look, you got to dribble, you got to look up, you got to keep your head up, you got to see the court, you got to see the hoop. If I, as a father, don't point, now dribble. If I don't point this out to him, if I don't teach him to bend in a different way, he's going to continue, head down, and he will not depart from it. He will not depart from this. He will not depart from the bent toward evil if I don't intervene. If I continue to allow him to go the way that he is bent, he will go through his whole life dribbling the basketball with his head down, not seeing the court, not seeing the goal, unable to walk in the truth. All right, thank you. Do you get it? This is what dawned on me last night on the way back from basketball as I'm looking at this verse going, God, I know that there are two angles. I know that this verse, as I grew up, I always heard this is a good thing, like train them up right, and when they're older, they're going to come right back to the good stuff. But at the same time, as I'm reading and studying, it also says, if you train them up and you let them go their way, then when they're older, they will stay going their way. If you let your child be entitled as a 6-year-old, they will be an entitled 36-year-old. If you continue to allow your child to be mean as a 7-year-old, they will be a mean 37, 47, 87-year-old. Train up a child in the way he wants to go. Train up a child in the way he's bent. And when he is older, when he's reached maturity, guess what? He's going to continue to go that way. What does this verse mean? That's what it means. We've got two opportunities. You see, me as a dad, if I continue to allow my kids to keep doing what they're doing and I keep training them in the way that they want to go, I let them make the decisions, I stop being the parent, then they're going to go the way they want to go their whole life. But I, as a parent, if I step in that moment, it's awesome because I can step in and say, look, I know you're not going to like me for this, but you got to put your head up. You got to try. You got to get in triple threat. You got to practice. You got to continue to practice because you're not going to get it right away. You're going to keep wanting to come back down. Your bent is going to keep bringing you down. But as I'm staying alongside you, I'm going to help you get to a place where you continue to dribble with your head up like it's like breathing. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. This is a proverb, not a promise. And so as you look at this verse, we do have to understand, remember that people are bent in a certain way. Yes, created in God's image, but bent toward evil. And so everyone has the free choice to do what they want. And they may choose to be stubborn. And your kids may grow up to hate God and to hate the church. And that's not on you if you were training these kids the way God wanted you to. Because they have to make the choice. But if you teach what you know and you reproduce what you are, your kids will walk in the truth. It has to start with you. Pastor Andrew, that is hard because I'm not perfect. I don't know what to do. How do I move them off their bent? How do I short-circuit this thing? You know, when the HVAC went out, there's this piece on the side of the house that called a disconnect. And when you pull that disconnect, it stops sending power to the unit and it gives you a chance to fix it. How do I pull the disconnect in my child's life when they're bent toward evil? You introduce them to Jesus Christ. You live and breathe Jesus yourself. So that when you come alongside your kids, like Noah and Ileana, I had the opportunity to coach Ileana. Like Ileana and her friends, when I'm coaching them, they listen to what I'm saying. Not just because I'm the coach, but because they know that for the most part I know what I'm talking about. Because I'm coming alongside them and showing them I can do it. And so when I say this is how you have to take your steps to the hoop, this is how you have to dribble, this is how you play defense, I'm showing them that, look, I can do this too. And if you do this, this will change things. And they do. It's the same way in your life as a parent. As you come alongside and you make the right choices, your kids will see it. And then those right choices, along with what you're saying, will help change the trajectory of your child's life. Are you with me? So introduce your child to Jesus. How do I short-circuit that power of sin in their life? You introduce them to Jesus. And you pray for insight into your child's character. You pray, God, I don't know how to, I'm a practical guy. I'm having a hard time with the creative side, with with training my creative child because all I want to do is put the rules in place. Why can't they understand the rules? God help me. God help me. God help me. God help me. Say it with me. God help me. God help me. God help me. Parenting is not for wimps. We've got to make the hard call. We've got to become a student of our children. We've got to be consistent. But we've got to maintain an open and loving relationship with our child. And if you do that, maybe they will not depart from it as they get older, as they move on. We should train our children with a purpose of seeing them walk in the truth. What is your purpose? Take the purpose as a parent and then back up. Am I living this out? Not easy. Very, very hard. But it is rewarding. And there is blessing in that. Parenting is hard, but thankfully, God is gracious because unless the Lord builds the house, we do it in vain. Children are a gift from the Lord. He's given them to us. He will have your back as a parent to train them up, to dedicate them, to show them where they need to get their nourishment so they can walk on their own 2 feet. And stop cleaning the toilet with your toothbrush. Unless God does it, we're doing it in vain. Last week, we had an opportunity as families in this church to come up here and to write your name and your children's names on a note card and pin it to the cross. And the reason we did that is we were saying, look, God, unless you build my house, I'm doing it in vain. I am dedicating, it was a week ahead, we're dedicating our children to the way of God. And so unless I dedicate my kids to God, I'm doing it in vain. And so putting it up there is an opportunity to say, God, look, I'm putting my kids on the cross of victory. God, I'm handing my kids over to you, and at the same time, I'm holding myself accountable to make sure that I'm not just teaching what I know, but I am reproducing what I am. And so as we come forward and sing this morning, if you didn't have an opportunity last week and you want to do it today, you can come up here. We've got some note cards. Write your name, your spouse's name, or whoever. You write your kids' names on there and you pin it to the cross. I went over here this week and I almost lost it, crying, seeing all the names of all the kids, adult children, dedicated to the Lord. So let's do it as a reminder. And for those of you that already wrote last week, if you'd like to, would you come up here to the front and pray while we sing the song? Worship team, come on forward. As we pray and sing, do it again. Pray for God to continue doing in the lives of these kids, of all the ones represented there and your own kids, for Him to help them learn to walk in the truth. Will you stand with me today, please?